Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing and brothers and sisters. Greetings to Brew Strong. With me today is my dear friend, Mitch Steele, the head of brewing at New Realm. What is your title now? Brewing operations, brewer. What do you call yourself?
I just call myself brewmaster. That makes it easy.
There you go. Master of all that's being brewed at New Realm. And New Realm's really expanded since you started a few years ago. It's you've got the operation in Virginia, you've added distilling, right?
Yeah, we've been growing. We've got 3 locations right now. We had 4. We unfortunately had to close one recently, but we've got a brew pub in the Charleston area in South Carolina, and we've got our production brewery in Virginia Beach. And where I work is the Atlanta brewery, which also does a lot of production, but also focuses a lot on innovation. So,
Mm-hmm.
anytime we're doing something with a new hop variety or a new recipe, or marketing is asked for some sort of wonky beer, we'll do it, and we'll do it in Atlanta. So it's a pretty good dynamic. We've got 2 distilleries right now within the breweries that we have. So we're really starting to put a lot of focus on spirits because there's a huge appetite for it in our
Mm-hmm.
area.
I think that's the growth in the craft world, in craft drinks world is all in spirits. That's really where it's coming on strong. People have shifted over there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've seen that. And it's funny, we got into this, and I think you and I talked about this at one point, but we got into getting a distiller's permit because we were losing a lot of event business in Atlanta
Mm.
because of Georgia law. All we can serve as a production brewery is stuff that we make on site.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't bring in spirits or wines or ciders or anything that wasn't made by us. So we got a distiller's permit and started making some spirits. So that was it. And yeah, and you know what, it's turned into a great thing. So it's
A
been a
lot.
big part of our business.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know what? What else is a lot of fun? Hanging out with our dear friend John Blickman from Blickman Engineering. He sponsored this show for God, I don't know how long I've been doing this show,
Forever.
15 plus years. And he's been kind enough to support it and make sure it keeps happening. So all you listening, if you get a chance, make sure to check out blickmanengineering.com. You can send a nice email to feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Tell John he reads them all. Tell him how much you appreciate him supporting the show and making it happen. Check them out. Lots of great equipment, very innovative. And like I said, a lot of fun. He's a very fun guy. Today, we are going to be talking about genetically modified and genetically engineered ingredients and how they can affect your brewing or maybe even the beers you buy in yeast, in malt, in hops. There's a lot that's happening, and the future may have, I don't know, consequences. Should I say something? I don't know. Depends on how you view it, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Mitch, tell me, what's the difference between gene editing and genetically modified organisms? Genetically modifying or gene editing? They sound different but similar.
Yeah, they are similar. It's something that I'm on the subcommittee with the Brewers Association, and we've been talking about this a lot because we're starting to see movement in several beer ingredients in this realm of gene manipulation. But for my understanding, and we are trying to put together something that really clarifies this, genetically modified or GMO means that you are taking a gene from a different species and inserting it into the species that you're trying to change. So you're taking something from a different plant and putting it into corn genetics or something like that. Whereas gene editing, as it relates to yeast and and to beer ingredients, my understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, so if I misspeak, forgive me, but my understanding is that this is a process that uses enzymes or something transferred into the organism's cell that changes the gene structure of the organism. So for example, when we're talking about thiolization and thiolized yeast, there's a gene in most brewers' yeast that's inactive that converts thiols into aromatic flavors or frees up bound thiols. And we can get into all that. But it's how these researchers are turning on these genes to make it work. And that's my understanding of what's going on the yeast side and with gene editing. Now there are some GMO yeast as well, which has been pretty interesting to play around with. But yeah, it's very confusing. I think is consumers, we look at GMO and say, oh my gosh, but it's everywhere. And I will tell you, most brewers that use some of these ingredients are struggling with how transparent to be about it.
Should we be concerned about the safety of using gene edited or GMO materials in our brewing?
So I don't think gene editing presents any sort of risk to people. And there's a lot of work going on in Canada with gene editing, and they've got some very stringent requirements. But, in general, they've been saying that this process is incredibly safe, to consume the products after the fact. GMO is the one that's more controversial. And people have different beliefs. And, if you talk to people that are strictly science people, they by and large, don't see a huge issue with GMO. But, it's the connotation is something that everybody has to deal with. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's safe or not safe. It's something that, you got to trust the people that understand the process and understand the risks. And hopefully there's enough testing going on to make sure that it is, it is safe. But we all consume GMO produce. I mean, corn, tomatoes, all that stuff is mostly modified at this point.
Now, I think it was back, I don't know, decades ago that you first started hearing about genetically modified corn, and then people worried that they'd plant it and it would take over the world, and the monsters would come. And but and for me, I was always like, well, that's stupid, it's going to be fine. But on the other hand, you think back to things like, I don't know, there's a poor example, radium. They thought radium was the cure-all, and they were giving people radium. And they were consuming radioactive materials, and that had tragic consequences. So they said it was a cure-all, it was a miracle. So I can see where people would become quite concerned. And for me, I think people just need to know what they're being given so that they can make their own decision on it. It's not necessarily something we should stop, but on the other hand, something that should be, maybe needs to be labeled. I don't know. So in specifics, how does gene editing or GMO apply to yeast itself? Because that's the one I'm seeing a lot of.
So there's a couple of things that are going on with yeast. There are, it's interesting, because for the first time in my life, I've had to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements with some yeast suppliers, and they are patenting these processes and this yeast, and they're registering the names and all this kind of stuff that we never used to see in this business, right? And but with yeast, there's two primary things that I've seen. Number one is the yeast that produces lactic acid during fermentation so that you get a nice clean lactic acid sour during fermentation, and you don't have to do any kettle souring. And those, we've done a lot of work with those at New Realm and have had good success with them. I think, you know, the lactic acid production it doesn't seem to impact the rest of the fermentation too severely. The yeast is tolerant to the low pH, and the beer comes out good. If anything, it may come out a little too acidic. And so, you know, there have been times when we've blended that down a little bit with some beer fermented with just a standard ale or lager yeast. So that's a big bucket of modified yeast that's out there. And then the other one that's really more recent, just in the past year or two, are these thiolized yeast strains. And you know, if there's a ton of research going on in hop chemistry, and you know, if you go back 10 years, everybody was talking about oil content and myrcene content and things like that. And now people are realizing that there are these compounds called thiols in hops, and they're also in malt apparently, but they are very aromatic compounds when they're free or available as a pure thiol. You know, we're talking nanograms per milliliter, you know, so like 0.05 parts per billion kind of levels, astronomically low, kind of hard to comprehend. But these are very fragrant and very aromatic compounds, and they're identifying, you know, the researchers are identifying these thiols that they're finding in hops, and some of the hops that are high in thiols are hops like Citra and some of the Southern Hemisphere hops. And then there are hops that have a lot of what are called bound thiols, which are attached to some other molecule or something. And what these yeasts do, these modified yeasts, is they can, during the fermentation, free up those thiols. And so you get an instantaneous blast of tropical fruit flavor in the beer. And we did an IPA that started off its life as a West Coast IPA in the brew house, but we fermented it with one of these yeasts. And by day 2, the hop character had gone from classic citrusy, resiny to 100% tropical fruit. And we didn't dry hop or do anything with it. It was just absolutely amazing, the flavors that are produced from using these yeast strains. So it's been fun. You know, there's some companies that are really diving into this hard, some yeast supplier companies. So it's been a really interesting development, I think.
Right. I heard that you know, there's other yeasts where they're actually taking genes from, let's say, fruit, from blackberries, and they're inserting that in a yeast. And then I've tasted the product of that, and it tastes like blackberries. Or, you know, they'll take something from hops and they'll put it into yeast, and it tastes like it was a ton of, you know, Cascade hops added to it.
Yeah, I've heard of the hop one. I hadn't heard of the was it blackberry that you mentioned, or blueberry?
Yeah, whatever fruit it was.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one. But yeah, the hop one, you know, it was touted as a yeast that you could use and avoid having to dry hop, and then you'd get more, you wouldn't have the losses you see when you dry hop.
Right.
There was another one that was a diacetyl reducer, I think, that was inserted into
Right.
strain.
Yeah.
So the yeast doesn't even produce diacetyl during fermentation, which I thought was really strange. But you know, it'd be interesting to play around with it. I haven't looked at that yeast yet.
I've heard of some people using that, and you know, some of these others, and it's becoming, you know, fairly broadly spread now, it seems to me. But yet I don't hear the breweries really talking about it when they describe their products. It's kind of, you know, again, it gets back to that thing. It's like, well, should you tell people what's going on with this?
Yeah. That's the conundrum. I think,
Yeah.
how transparent should we be? And believe me, we've had conversations about this at our company, and the Brewers Association is trying to come up with some recommendations for transparency when
Hmm.
using these products. And it's not something that's been easy to resolve.
All right.
Should brewers just make their own choice as to whether to tell people? Should they disclose it? Should it be on the label? Um, it's not an easy question to answer.
Well, because it goes back to, well, you're still just using, malt, hops, water and
Hmm.
yeast. It's just it's been modified. Um, it kind of comes along the line of enzymes.
Hmm.
A lot of people, they turn to craft brew because they viewed big brewers as using who knows what in their beer. There's all sorts of claims of adding some sort of additive or some sort of chemical or whatever it would be
Hmm.
that could be harmful for you. So you really wanted craft brew, which was very pure and
Yeah.
follow the right Heizgebot, or didn't, and used fruits or whatever. And it seems odd to me, the use of enzymes as well. Then enzymes started becoming a thing, and well, it's always been a thing, but brewers started using it more. I know a number of brewers that add an enzyme for diacetyl reduction
Hmm.
or for clarity. Um, I never did, because we didn't have a problem with diacetyl. We didn't have a problem with clarity. We're able to do all those things without using the enzymes, and the enzymes would have cost us money.
Yeah.
So it didn't make a better beer, and it would have cost us money. So the answer was no, we didn't do it.
we've
But
we've done a bit. We've used beta glucanase to try and, with big, huge
mhm,
beers that have a lot of dark malts or a lot of, non-barley malts like wheat or rye or something like that.
mhm,
And the idea is that breaks down the really gummy beta glucan component in the mash, and so you can lauter it.
right.
We've had mixed results with that. We've tried the diacetyl reduction enzyme,
Mhm,
and then the other one that I'm seeing a lot of brewers use, and this was the enzyme that was used in brewed IPA, that breaks down all the starches into two
mhm.
chain,
Yeah, some sort of
maltose.
amylase. I think.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
amylase enzyme. And that was what people were doing to make brewed IPA, to make them, so dry that they finished it below zero terminal gravity. Um, and when people are doing low carb beers, that's typically what they're using. And that's the one that somewhat surprises me, because that always has been the realm of the big brewers, with
Mhm,
using these enzymes to really knock out any sort of residual dextrin content
right.
whatsoever, and make the beer low calorie, make the beer light. That never was something that, until recently, that craft brewers really messed around
Mhm,
with, but I'm
mhm.
seeing a lot of it.
Well, and I think part of the issue there is, if you use an enzyme in the mash, a beta glucan enzyme, um, the wort goes through the kettle and gets
Hmm.
boiled, and the enzymes get denatured and no
Yep.
longer really exist, or they're destroyed and don't function anymore. And so the consumer, there you find, if you add something cold side, a lot of the enzymes I saw recommended filtering and things, sterile filtering and stuff like that, to remove the enzymes
Yep.
at the end, or at least reduce the count down. Where, as for most craft brewers, especially smaller craft brewers, they're not filtering, they're
No.
not pasteurizing, they're not doing anything. Those enzymes are still present
Yep.
when they send this beer out to market. And so that becomes a question. Again, I don't think it would harm me, because I put in my stomach and the acids there denature the enzymes, and I'm good to go. But I can see how people would be worried. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more with Mitch about GMO and genetically engineered products in brewing right after this. All right, we're back talking with my good buddy And I really appreciate you doing the show.
Yeah,
Just talking to you too.
it's fun. It's great to see you, and thanks for asking me. I was looking forward to this.
Yeah. All right. So we were talking about enzymes. Anything to add on the enzyme discussion?
I think with all the research that's going on into things like hop creep and things like that, where brewers are starting to realize that just the naturally occurring enzymes in yeast and hops and these regular ingredients in beer can still be active in the package, because as you said, brewers by and large aren't sterile filtering or pasteurizing their beers. And with the dry hopping changes and hop variety changes and things like that, there is a bit of a risk of fermentation continuing in the package a little bit, and the enzymes breaking down the dextrins into fermentable sugars. If you have yeast in there, then the yeast are going to act on it and ferment it out. I mean, it's basically, hop creep continuing to happen after packaging. That's not a huge issue, but I do think it's something brewers should be aware of.
Right. All right. So kind of got sidetracked off of yeast. So they're using something like CRISPR to
Yes,
slice and dice yeast, or they're punching in genes from other things like fruits or hops or whatever. And then is there some sort of limit to what they can do with this technology? Are we not thinking broad enough? We're thinking just some kind of flavors. I mean, can they make yeast that you sprinkle on the malt, and then in a week's time there's beer sitting there? Or how is this going to change things?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think this is just getting started. And the people that are working on these things are incredibly intelligent and can probably figure out how to do anything that somebody sees a need for.
Right.
I think right now most of it's focused on flavor and getting the flavors you want in a beer without having to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. Like with a souring Cerevisiae yeast, that kind of thing. So you don't have to kettle sour and you don't risk having the butyric acid forming in the brew house and all that stuff. So I think the door is opened. And it's opening wider, and it's going to be interesting to see what people come up with. I saw recently that one of the companies came out with a thiolized lager yeast, and I'm like, okay, I don't think I want tropical fruit in my lagers,
right.
but some people might, and
right.
Good on them for giving it a shot, and it may be a big thing. And I think. The other thing that I think is related to this is I think there's a lot of work going on with gene modification involving crops and with drought tolerance and those kind of things being bred into barley, for example. And I mean, in 2021 the barley crop was so bad. And it came in, I believe it came in at its lowest total volume since 1949. That was the number I saw, because so much of the malt was unusable or so much of the barley was unusable for making brewing malt out of. So one of the things that we're catching wind of is all the research is going on in Canada in particular with creating new malt varieties that are more drought tolerant and can deal with weather extremes better, because whether you believe in global warming or not, weather patterns are changing. And there's drought is a very real thing in Europe and in where they grow malt in the United States and in Canada. It's been a real issue for a few years.
So are there any genetically modified or genetically engineered malts that you know of?
My understanding is nothing has been released commercially yet. It's just research that's going on. The growers are probably the ones that are going to drive this, because if they can increase their yield per acre,
Mhm.
they're going to be all on it,
Right.
and so it's definitely an agronomic thing as opposed to a changing a beer flavor kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Well, this sort of thing, don't they spend like 5 years growing test crops and seeing how they work and testing them after malting and all that stuff and making sure they
Yeah,
still malt right? It takes quite some time to do this. It's not something people think it just happens overnight. It's like, well, no, the technology is invented, then people start applying it to things and they test those things, and it's, I'm sure,
yeah,
decades in the making.
I'm
It's
sure.
getting back to enzymes. You know, I guess is maybe 30 years ago or so that they started making artificial or man-made enzymes to accomplish certain tasks,
Hmm.
which you haven't really heard of, but it's coming on. The technology is advancing and they use it for all sorts of different things. It's a pretty fascinating subject.
It's interesting. I think the brewing business has always been pretty focused on new technologies. And I think, since the 1800s, in the Industrial Revolution, so much changed because of the brewing business.
Mhm.
You know, um, and I think craft brewing kind of took it took it back, to what you called pure and natural, and which was all great, and was definitely a response to what was going on with American lager brewing. Um, but now, it's the technology and the innovation side of it is starting to come back, because it's getting very competitive,
Mhm.
and you need to have something that differentiates your beer from everybody else that's brewing great beer.
Right.
So it's been a real interesting thing for me to watch over the last few years. um, I spent, I spent a lot of time with Anheuser-Busch, and the technology was always something that was very important to that
Mhm.
company. They didn't take it as far as some of the other companies in the United States did. They still maintained very traditional German brewing processes, but as far as instrumentation technology and automation technology, that was something that Anheuser-Busch embraced 100%. And
Mhm.
it just made things more efficient, and you get more beer out of the end at the end result.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because um, when I was with Heretic, when I'd order stuff like dextrose, or it was made from corn, or flaked corn or something like that for use in making beer, um, you had to make sure that you were purchasing something that was non-GMO, or you had to pay extra if you wanted non-GMO.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was, the customers were concerned.
Yeah.
They, thought that, you got questions. It's like, I'm sure you get the question all the time. It's like, are your beers vegan?
Yes. We
Right.
get that question a lot. Yes.
Right. And it's like, okay, so you can't use anything, that wouldn't be vegan.
Yeah.
Um, so it's the same thing with, folks concerned about GMO.
Yeah.
So I think if you're concerned about that, and you're buying, just packaged bulk, corn or dextrose or whatever you might have, you might want to ask your homebrew shop, if it's GMO or not, because homebrew shops, they need to compete and stay alive on price, but they need to compete and stay alive on customer service too. So you never know what you might be getting sometimes.
Yeah. And no one knows if it's a concern or not, but obviously people have opinions about it. So
Mhm.
it's I think it's a good idea to ask and just understand. I think
Understand where your stuff's coming from. Yeah.
understand where it's coming from. I think that's so important, regardless of what you're concerned about. Just knowing the source of your ingredients, whether you're home brewing or professionally brewing, it's important.
Mhm. Right. Right. On that note, let's take a quick break, And when we come back, we'll have more about genetically modified, genetically engineered crops and brewing right after this. All right, we're back. Want to tell you about my good friends at Brew Chatter, great homebrew shop in near Reno, Nevada. It's in Sparks, technically, right near Revision Brewing and a couple other great breweries out there. Good folks. They have a great shop, and I'm sure they know whether their products are GMO or not, and can help you with those questions. Really great guys. Very generous towards the community as well. If you're ever out around Sparks, check them out. Go in there. They got a nice little bar. You get some great local beers. If you are ordering off the web, you can find them at brewchatter.com. Good folks there. Check them out. Also sponsors of the show. That's why I mentioned them. All right. Let's see. Where were we? So if you're using the genetically modified yeast, they express whatever compounds they ferment and express whatever compounds. If you were to make sure to remove all the yeast, you sterile filtered the beer or pasteurize it, the yeast were gone. Is that, less of a worry to the consumer, or does that not matter? Since the yeast have already expressed the compounds. And I guess the compound that will turn you into a zombie is already in there.
Right. Right. I would imagine that both those processes would remove, would remove any enzyme, that is, part of the genetic structure of the yeast that frees up thiols or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I don't know if any of those compounds or mechanisms in the yeast cell are secreted out into the beer as it's fermenting, whether it would stay there. So pasteurization would be, probably the safest bet for absolutely removing any residual impact of that yeast. But yeah, I don't know. I think people still need to learn about it, and there's a lot to learn.
When I heard about this, I thought that the market for this wasn't the craft brewer or the big brewer. It was homebrewers. I thought homebrewers would have a lot of fun with this, and they really didn't have to worry about what the commercial market thought of them. They could just have fun with it themselves. But I don't know if it's available to homebrewers through homebrew shops.
I think some of it is, yes.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen homebrew packets of some of these yeasts. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's available. And you're right. I would have expected homebrewers to, it may not have been available for a long time, but for very much time, but I would expect homebrewers being as creative and as innovative as homebrewers tend to be, would be all over this.
Right.
It's and honestly, I've always felt that home brewing is what's driven innovation in craft brewing.
I agree.
And so it's interesting that the craft brewers jumped on this with as much vigor as they did. I think,
Well, most craft brewers, came from home brewing now.
Well, that is true.
What I found when using some of these things is, and my talking with others who have, is it's not something, you can taste the character of the yeast, and it's not that natural seeming sometimes. You have to kind of blend it with other, you gotta, if you're doing something that's, producing a lot of tropical fruit, you gotta make sure you're also hitting with a lot of other hops that kind of match up with it. Otherwise it kind of stands out. Kind of, seems a little unnatural at points.
Yeah, I think it can be one dimensional, I
Right.
think, and I think most brewers follow up the fermentation with an additional dry hop so that you get
Mhm.
some what's considered more normal hop character in the
Right.
beer. I think that's important. It's you
Well,
know,
it's
it's all
like,
about balance, right?
yeah, it's like using some of those new hop products where, they've stripped out a lot of the leaf matter and you're just adding the oils and, a lot of just the resins, and it doesn't taste right. You have to use the
Yeah.
hop leaf matter because you've got to have that taste in there. Otherwise, it's very strange.
Yeah, it's too much of a departure, you know, and I agree. I mean, I think that's a great comparison because, you know, playing around with some of those new hop products, they're great, they're fun, they're great to try, but you know, in the end, I always end up blending back in some normal type 90 pellets, you know,
Mhm. Oh
and
yeah,
trying, you know,
same here.
in, you know, then I get a flavor, you know, work on getting a flavor that's exceptional, but you know, still has elements of tradition and, you know, craft beer tradition. So
Mhm.
I think you're right. I think that's really important.
Let's see here. What else do I have in my list of questions for you? Um, speaking of hops, is that kind of the future? Is there uh, something that we should expect? I mean, I think they've kind of avoided that for a long time, right? I think they were talking about this a long time ago, and then they just stuck with traditional breeding on the hops. Why is that? Do you know why they haven't gone further down that road?
Well, yeah, I mean, hop breeding is still very traditional. It takes 10 years to really vet a new variety. And you know, I can't speak for hop farmers as to why they've stuck with the tried and true, except that hop farmers and farmers in general tend to be conservative about this kind of stuff. And they're probably not seeing the impacts of the weather. I mean, they certainly are
Hmm.
in hop growing regions, but maybe not to the extent that barley growers are in
Hmm.
the middle of the country or the middle of the continent. Um, you know, I can tell you that you know, I've been learning in the past few weeks about how poor the German hop crop is. And the hop associations in Germany are encouraging growers to grow newer varieties that have better agronomic qualities than the old varieties like Hallertau and Tettnang and Hersbrucker, which, you know, is you know, I'm concerned about that because I love those hops, and some of the new
Right.
German hops have been really adequate additions to that kind of flavor profile. But you know, some of them have more fruit character, and you know, it's um, you know, but hop varieties come and go. It's kind of a natural thing. But I think hop farmers in general, I think the ones that are involved in breeding enjoy breeding
Hmm.
and enjoy growing the hops, and you know, I just don't think they've gotten to the point where they feel compelled to go down that road yet. And I don't see it happening anytime soon. You know, I could be proven wrong tomorrow, but I think, you know, I think there's so much going on with breeding right now that's
Hmm.
really exciting that, you know, there may not be a need or perceived need.
Right.
You know, I know some of the hop varieties, um, you know, don't have good agronomic qualities. And, you know, when you start learning about that, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, Cashmere, a brand new hop variety, it's got a very limited picking window, and Centennial is, you know, early, and you know, and hop growers are looking at, you know, when the hops ripen up, you know, during the harvest season, and they call that the picking window,
Hmm.
and they're growing hops so that each period of time during the harvest season is filled with hops that are maturing, and they don't stack things up at the beginning or the end where they can't bring them all in.
Hmm.
And you know, that might be something that people look at, but I think, you know, by and large, hops have remained very traditional in the approach.
Right. I kind of think, the opposite in a way, because I think, previously they were, one, they didn't know that there was any money in it, but it's been proven that there is with all the you know copyrighted or trademarked or licensed hops that are being grown now that are quite popular, they're seeing that they can charge a boatload more for those hops than they could for, other hops. So that's the one shoe. And the other shoe is they're seeing that, people are accepting the yeast being modified. And then I think if they start doing stuff to malt, they'd be like, yeah, why aren't we doing it to hops? And so I wouldn't be surprised if they're working on it now. I would think they're working on it just to see what they can do. And somebody's working on it. Whether the growers will grow it, that's another question.
Yeah, that is another question. It's a really interesting thing to look at. And I think you're right. I think if malted barley or barley breeding goes down this path, then it would be a natural progression of things for hops to follow. I just haven't seen any evidence of people doing it yet. But there's a lot of smart people, a lot of really well-educated people doing a lot of research on hops right now. So, it's quite possible that somebody's going down that road.
Right. And, I assume it's, essentially the same processes that, they would do for, other grains and for yeast in the way they would modify it. And isn't there, susceptibility to, mildews and blights and things like that? I would think that would be something they'd want to engineer out of the hops, and drought tolerance, and like you're saying, change the picking window on them. Lots of things that I'm sure they could do. Maybe even up the production of alpha acids.
I think it's a whole new world. And I think honestly, I think if the hop growers and the hop industry goes down this road, it'd probably be more focused on pest resistance, the powdery mildew, the downy mildew, those kind of things that can really destroy a crop very fast. And then maybe drought tolerance, as opposed to picking windows or yield per acre or things like that, which are going to be important too. But those are all things that they look at. So I think it's all it's all possible.
When they started in working with corn and things like that, what was it they were trying to achieve there? Was it, again, pest resistance, or
I'm not really sure. I suspect it was yield, and maybe agronomic. I mean, I'm sure it was mostly focused on agronomics, whether it was yield or whether it was pest resistance or whether
both can result in better profits.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know what I like to see progress, so, and I like technology. So for me, it's all exciting and it's all good. I'd like to see them go as fast as they can and see what comes of it. But I'm never sure how others read that.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I mean, we have, the science background and tend to embrace scientific development and research and things like that. And I think it's coming, and people that are involved in the ingredient industries are saying very loudly, it's coming. And so, I don't know, it's not going to stop, I don't think. And so I think anything that helps the brewers and helps the growers make a little more money is good. That just helps everybody. We can keep beer prices down or keep them reasonable, and not have to deal, maybe weather some of the inflation that we're dealing with right now and everything. So the
price of everything's gone up just insanely in brewing and everything else. But boy, it just, suppliers that would just tell me, it's like, yeah, we're gonna give you a new price every month. We'll let you know each month what the price is going to be, and you have no choice.
No,
You're stuck.
And so much of it has to do with shipping costs, which are incredibly volatile right now, and they've
Yeah,
skyrocketed in the past couple of years.
right.
And and I remember we were negotiating a malt contract, and I said, why did the price go up again this year after you took it up so much last year? And their short answer was shipping. Shipping costs have
Mm.
increased dramatically, and they can't make any money at that old price. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I guess the shipping companies are making giant windfall profits.
I
Uh,
hope somebody's making some money because
yeah, I think a lot of it, a lot of the inflation that's happened has been from profiteering. People
yeah,
see that opportunity to take as much as they want, and they get greedy.
yeah,
And,
and they've got a built-in excuse, or a reason.
right,
So
right,
yeah,
and they think, they think nothing of it, but they're kind of killing the goose that lays the golden egg.
exactly. Yeah, it's a very short-term
Short-term
point
thing.
of thinking. Yeah.
All right. One last short break, and after we come back, we'll wrap up with any thoughts you have after this. If you're listening live, feel free to ask questions in the live chat on the Brewing Network page on Facebook, and I actually can see those and can ask them away. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back. We're talking genetically modified and genetically engineered ingredients in beer, and what kind of impact that may have. I don't know. I think it's exciting. I think it's inevitable in a way, unless the consumers really push back against it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's coming, and it's the research is going into this is phenomenal. And also the research is just going into hop chemistry and understanding what's in the oils and hops
Mhm.
and in those lupulin glands, and they're identifying new thiols all the time.
Mhm.
So they're the researchers are doing deep dives into what components of hops uh, are contributing to beer flavor, and they're learning so much new stuff, and I don't know, there was one hop supplier who put out a research paper, or it was basically a chart that showed how well the hop flavors survived fermentation,
Mhm.
and it's very variety specific. Centennial
Mhm.
was the one, that if you use Centennial in the whirlpool, more flavor is going to carry through the end of fermentation than any other hop that they tried. And they have
Mhm.
this whole bar chart,
Yeah,
and
Centennial is that way. I mean,
yeah.
you can always taste Centennial no matter where you use it.
Yeah. So that kind of research is going on is only going to help brewers make better beer,
Mhm.
and I 100% embrace that.
Well, and yeah, I've always, you know, in the studies and the information that's coming out is fantastic. There's an acceleration. It's like Moore's law, on hop chemistry. They're doubling the amount of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's
It's
logarithmic increase in knowledge.
yeah.
Um, and I think interesting to me is you go back to IBU calculations. So way back in the day, we all calculate IBUs using a formula. There were
Mhm.
several formulas. You picked one, and it was wrong. It didn't really matter because what it was just a way for you to put a number on what you were doing, and you could adjust from there.
Yeah.
And the uh, the thing is, the reason it was wrong is because it depended on, in my view, the yeast you were using. And certain yeast will take more of the bitterness out. Certain yeast will leave more of it in. The finished beer is always going to be different. And so I think there's a fascinating bit of research to be done in the combination of hops and yeast, and they're doing a lot of that now with the biotransformation and all that.
Mhm.
I think there's still a lot to be done there, and maybe there's more genetic editing to do to make hops and yeast work together even better. We got a question in from Adam. He was asking, what's a good pH range going into the fermenter for those lactic acid producing yeasts?
Just a standard wort pH, 5.2 or so, somewhere in there. It'll drop the pH very quickly to low 3s during the fermentation. So you don't need to acidify your wort at all. It's the yeast will take care of that.
There you go. And is there any way to stop the acidification at an earlier point? Say you wanted something more in the mid 3s instead of the low 3s. Does having a more dextrinous wort, less fermentable wort, affect the amount of acid produced? If you do 2 worts, one that was highly fermentable and was going to finish lower in finishing gravity, and one that was a lot less fermentable and would finish at a higher finishing gravity, are the pHs going to be different? I imagine they would.
Yeah, I mean, logically, you would think they would. That is not something we've looked at. I think that's a really great question.
Right.
If the extent of fermentation activity that happens in the tank, does that impact the final total acidity and pH of the product? We've always approached it as, never trying to stop it, just blending if we needed to. And that was,
right.
That's been very effective because that softens the tartness, in some of the beers that we've made. So yeah, I think that's a great question. I will say we do a beer that's got a whole bunch of lactose in it. And it's a sweet Berliner Weiss with lemon and tea in it, and it's supposed to taste like an Arnold Palmer. And we are using one of those lactic acid producing yeasts in it, and the sourness is very mellow, because of all the sweetness that's in the beer as well. And I'd have to go back and look at our analytical records to see if the pH is actually higher in that one, because that one has less fermentation activity. That's a really interesting question.
There you go. That's what I bring to the show. Interesting question. Well, and if you like this and you like the material that we put out, make sure to check out our fine sponsors. Check out Blickman Engineering. Again, he's been doing this, paying for the show for like 16 years, 15, 16 years he's been paying for this. That is a lot of coin and a lot of information that we've provided. And check out our good friends at Brew Chatter up in Reno. If you're ever around that area, they're great. If you're ever up there, Mitch, have you've been to Reno, haven't you?
It's been many years. It's been about 7 or 8 years. I need to go. My brother actually moved to Reno a little while ago, so I need to make a trip at some point.
Well, there you go. And let me know if you're going. It's a short ride up the hill for me, and we'll meet up in Reno and hit all these places and have some fun.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. If you're listening live, stay tuned. We're going to have a Q&A show right after this, and Mitch is going to stick around for that, answer some of the questions that people have sent in. And if you're listening live, you can ask your questions in the chat, just on Facebook, on the Brewing Network page. You go to the video there and live chat, and you can just type your questions in, just like Adam did with his fine question about pH. So until then, everybody, brew strong,